Woodsmanship and what we are talking about is learning what is important and what is not in whitetail deer hunting. Most people have no clue.
If you don't know Bobby Worthington, it's this simple. If he talks, you listen.
Trail out in the woods that is heavy because deer are forced onto it because they're going around some kind of restriction means everything.
Bobby Worthington is considered to be one of the best whitetail hunters of all time. He's been featured in North American Whitetail multiple times and hunts deer just like the common man.
61-year-old Bobby Worthington dominated at the International Bow Hunters event.
He is a true woodsman and a true whitetail pioneer, and it was our privilege to interview him. He recently wrote a book. We're going to give one away. It's a signed copy by Bobby Worthington. Leave a comment below. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We're going to give it away. We have Whitetail Cribs coming with him. Another rut episode coming live later this fall. But this is a snippet of who Bobby Worthington is and why you should listen.
I'll tell you how I learned that. It was a giant, massive 8-point with a lot of stickers and probably a 7 or 8 pound rack. That's how I learned that.
Bobby, I've enjoyed the day so far. We finished up the Whitetail Cribs. That'll go live later this fall. But I bought your book earlier this year. Admittedly, it took me a little bit to crack it open, but when I did, it was a page turner. I had my highlighter out, I was taking notes, and really a lot of, I've recorded a bunch of podcasts. You said here, you know, the podcast hosts are more confused than ever. And when he said that, I was like, yeah, sometimes it's like my brain's getting pulled in every direction from all the conversations I've had. And I think there's probably a lot of people that, you know, read multiple books or watch different hunters or listen to different people. Why is there more information now and more serious deer hunters are more confused than ever?
I'd have to say there's 2 or 3 reasons for that. It all stems from deer hunting is not what I would call an exact sport. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but there's no script to it. There's only an outline. And so many people will kill a big deer doing one thing, and they'll think that they can apply that to every situation, and they're not. They're individual personalities. So there's only a few things that can put individual personalities that do individual things in the same place. It's not an exact sport in that. Take 2 other things I'm involved with, competition archery. It is an exact sport. We walk up to that target with the people you're shooting against, and we score that target. They're all looking at it and watching and agreeing. If there is a controversy, which very seldom is, you call the judge. Okay, something else I'm involved in is field trialing beagles. As participants, we're back as well. We're not. Yeah, we're participants, but we're not the judges. The judges are up there in front of us. We're not in a position to see everything that goes on. He may say this particular dog picked up this check on this rabbit, or this particular dog was swinging, or this particular dog was off the line. And we're not up there to see that. And plus, it's a judgment call of where the line was anyway. So it's not an exact activity. Deer hunting's the same way. But what I'm meaning by what I'm saying is, you may read something or hear something on a podcast and think that sounds reasonable, and human logic it might. And you might get out there in the woods and you might try that and you might be successful at it. You may kill a big deer. And it may have nothing to do with what you thought, for the reason you thought. Mm-hmm. Nothing to do with it. I believe I could convince somebody that you need to hunt where there's no deer sign. Because over the years, bucks have learned if they make a lot of sign where they're living, then hunters key in on it. And the hunter's always there. And they go through the woods, and where they find the most buck signs, where they find the most hunting presence, the most human presence. So they've learned to avoid places with deer sign and not make any of themselves. I might could make a reasonable argument to that, and you might believe me. And during the rut, you might go out there and hunt a week in a tree the furthest away from any sign you could find, and you might kill a giant. Time in the woods during the rut equals dead deer. Matter of fact, that's 2 of the things of my 3 points that I always use and stress. The amount of time you hunt and hunt during the right time of year. So I'm convinced that a lot of people actually think and believe what they're doing is correct. Honest people, and passing that on when it may not be.
Mm-hmm.
So many trophy rooms you go into has one giant. That give them some notoriety. And that give them some credibility in their own mind. And then they hunt a whole lot. They get excited. They got it figured out. And they hunt a whole lot. And then they've got a good 2.5 or 2 or 3 good 2.5s and a good 3.5. So they've got a halfway decent trophy room to most people's eyes, you know. But really what they're doing could be nothing to do with what would increase their percentage that they can kill multiple mature bucks on purpose. Mm-hmm. It's just they tried something and they spent enough time out there during the right time of year that it worked, that they killed a deer. That could have been by luck, total by luck. Nearly everybody that's hunted a lot has one giant, and then they've got a few immature bucks. And that tells me they don't really know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. They've been out there long enough. I don't mount immature bucks. I don't shoot them. I don't even shoot 140, 145, or even 150 inch mature buck. Don't shoot them. So it's not an exact sport in that you can do something, you can get lucky in it, where you can't get lucky with somebody judging them arrows. You know, you can't get, it's not an exact sport. And time in the woods and hunting during the rut. They may hunt all year, but part of that period is going to be during the rut. They may not connect, okay, I killed that buck because I was hunting during the rut. You're dealing with personalities. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people think they're using the right technique, and they're not. Then you've got the ones that deceive people. They get online and they'll just absolutely deceive them. Teaching something that ain't true, and they realized a long time ago it wasn't. They may have killed 1 or 2 giants, and then they've done it for 20 years and hadn't, but they can't back up now and say, hey, everything I told you is wrong. You ever read that? You ever read where somebody said, everything I told you, all that stuff I told you I'd learn all my life is not correct?
I've never ran across that.
You'll not do it. Their pride won't let them.
Has there been anything that you've changed your mind on over 60 years? Like, maybe earlier when you were still learning or hunting, and you found success, and then 30 years later you reflect back on that, and maybe you realize you thought you killed a buck because of whatever reason, and then 30 years later, like
it didn't take me 30 years to reflect on it. I used to think that you can hunt strapes and rubs, buck sign, all through the rut, when they're long gone from their core area where they're making their strape lines and rub lines and they're looking for hot does. But I'd keep with that and keep with it. Wouldn't be successful. Maybe around Thanksgiving when the availability of hot does would pretty well be gone, and they would come back to their core area and start working their strapes and rubs again. But I used to think that sign, especially a big scrape, because of things I read early on from some of the older writers that come up when I did, I used to think that, and I found out that no, that's not, once they're off their pattern, once you can no longer pattern, once they're going hard, traveling across country, going across open fields, open roads, I've learned that there's no good to stay there and keep hunting that hot sign they was making. Mm-hmm. And I used to think, and we didn't realize, that they were nocturnal. Back when I first started in the early 70s, I used to think, because the first week of October there was giant rubs and strapes showing up, I need to get in there right then and kill him, when I was just destroying my chances of success because he was still nocturnal. And I was in there wiring it out, and he finally got educated to the fact, and the sign dried up. He wouldn't even come through there at night because of that. So people ain't going to back up and say they're wrong. And we're resistant to change. I mean, it's never dawned on a lot of people, if you won't change your mind, you can't change anything. The person who can't change his mind can't change nothing in this world. Nothing about what he does or nobody else does. It's going to be the same. Mm-hmm. And to improve, change is a requirement. If you don't change, you can't improve. So what I have come up with is through changing all these years. So one reason is a lot of guys may think what they're doing is best. And it may take them 10, it may hunt 10 more years, and they may say, man, I've hunted for 10 years now, I ain't killed another big one. I might need to look at something different. And they just won't do it. And some of them will. And then, like I said, people show up 2 or 3 years in a row with big deer, and they'll be asked to speak on podcasts and this and that, and they'll just spew all this stuff about hunting transition zones, or I don't even know what a transition zone is. You know, I don't know if the deer does or not. But I don't listen to podcasts. I don't want to get confused. I don't want to think, well, that sounds reasonable, when it's not based on logic. It's not based on evidence. I let evidence deer sign, and what I'm seeing in the woods drive my conclusions, not what somebody dreams up that sounds logical. And then there's, like we said, there was a lot of confusion here about 10 or so years ago. I used to write for North American Whitetail magazine all the time, and I used to stress the importance of staying out of the woods until October 25th. And then Don Higgins, a good friend of mine, great guy, and the other ones, hunting managed properties. They learned to set their properties up, bedding here, switch grass, or clear cut, and right beside it the food. Right in between it, maybe a cross fence or a box blind, and totally control that property. Where the good 2.5s and 3.5s that move around in the fall outside the rut in daylight don't get killed, because we're going to see what they become. And now they're mature, and they're still got that habit trait. And then Don gets on there, and the first week of October, or all through October, he's killing giants. And people said, oh, that's the thing to do. You know, and how is he doing it? Between bedding and feeding? No, not the rut, it's feeding pattern. And then they get confused. And then they hear me say, no, you stay out of the woods October 25th. Well, what's the difference here?
Yeah. One
is a man-made situation where you dictate where the deer is going to bed and feed and how they're going to go between the two. The other is what the deer do naturally, and especially in hunted areas where the ones get killed. That's the only ones left that reach maturity is deer that's nocturnal, other than the rut. So they're trying to combine that. I remember the first podcast I ever done. The guy asked me, how do you zero in on what acorn tree a mature buck is feeding under, where you'll know it's hard for us to find where deer are feeding in the big woods? Well, there's a reason for that. They've not got an exact feeding source. They might feed under a white oak tree here one night, and the next night over here under another. Deer like diversity when they have it. That's why we plant different kinds of food plots. But they also like diversity in the big woods. They might feed on acorns a night or two, then they're over here in a greenbrier patch or a honeysuckle patch or something. So, and they're bedding. They might bed on a ridge point today, and they might get bumped, and before you know it, they're half a mile over here on another ridge point, especially during the rut when there's no pattern to them. And you got to hunt them then. That's when they're moving around in daylight. Mm-hmm. I asked that podcast host, I said, why would I want to know where a deer's feeding at? He said, so you can hunt them. I said, he may be bedding 2 miles from there. I said, plus, since deer in the big woods in hunted areas get killed the first decent rack they got, and there's very few in any given year, maybe none, that is not nocturnal. They're all nocturnal outside the rut. And in the rut, they're only worried about breeding. They're not worried about going to a prime food source and sitting there gourding themselves. They'll eat wherever they find food at on their travels looking for hot dogs. So since outside the rut, they're only moving at night. And during the rut, they're not worried about no food. Why would I want to be concerned about where an acorn tree is? And it was like it shocked him and enlightened him at the same time. I never thought about that.
He was waiting for you to say the magic acorn tree that, you know, and I get what you're saying, and I really understand, which I feel that, you know, when we wrapped up the Whitetail Cribs, I didn't know this, but you actually write songs, and you have a song, you know, Where'd the Woodsmanship Go? I want to talk about woodsmanship because I feel that for me, I didn't have to grow up with as much woodsmanship because, and this is anyone that is younger, because we have cell cameras, we have digital maps. And I'm not saying we don't need woodsmanship. I'm just saying we didn't have to go through the tribulations that you did because you didn't have these additional aids to be somewhat enough to run into a mature buck every now and then. So I really want to talk about woodsmanship, but how does, you talk about in your book too, but how does someone that wants to learn woodsmanship, they hear people that have decades of experience say everyone lacks woodsmanship. How do you do it?
Well, number one is two thoughts you made.
Yeah, I know. I'm bad at that sometimes.
Number one is it's not tribulation we go through. It's the joy of having a challenge and overcoming it.
Fair.
So it's enjoyable. It's not tribulation. Learning is enjoyable. Number two is what we've talked about this whole time is woodsmanship.
Mm-hmm.
Woodsmanship can be defined as a lot of things. How to find certain plants that are edible, how to purify water or start a fire without a match. But woodsmanship and what we are talking about is learning what is important and what is not in whitetail deer hunting. Most people have no clue. They will worry about and spend tremendous time worrying and fooling with and concerned about and spending time working on something that has no bearing on them killing a great deer. They don't understand that.
What are some examples of that?
I don't know how to say it without getting on people's toes,
Get on people's toes. Say how it is.
There's a lot of ignorance out there. Once you get out of the realms of is that mature buck at a time when he's patternable, when I can pattern him on his sign and figure out how to kill him when he's on a pattern, and do I know when he'll start moving in daylight and make my move. And can I learn how to, when he loses his pattern, when he's no longer on a pattern, do I know how to find the right funnel? And do I know how to set up correctly in that funnel for different wind directions and different thermal currents and figure out how to kill him? In the line of trophy hunting, that is woodsmanship. And that is all that's important. All of this other stuff is just man-made, man-dreamed up fluster and fluff.
Mm-hmm.
And it really can fluster a lot of people and confuse them. And it's not complicated, it's simple, but it is very difficult.
I agree, because even, reading your book, For the Rut, and this is for big woods hunters or people that hunt pressured areas, not, trying to think the best way to describe it, but a managed farm, man-made farm, like where it's very
controlled.
Yes. And I think a lot of people hunt situations like that and try to compare it to, like you already made that distinction, but talking about funnels with specifically in the rut being a big part where, you say not all funnels are created equal.
Yeah.
You got soft-sided funnels, hard sided funnels, long range, short range, and then
two-sided, one-sided.
Yeah.
You can tighten two-sided. Man, if you want to dive into that, we got a lot of talking. Categorizing funnels, knowing which ones are significant and which ones are not is important. How to find them is important.
Which, not to interrupt, but I feel that there's probably, when people hear funnels, and you said specifically in your book, it's oftentimes you can't find one from a map, because I think e-scouting is a really big thing where people feel that they can look at a big chunk of timber or a big chunk of habitat and identify funnels. Do you think that's possible or likely?
We've got during my first class, Joe wanted me to show on the top of graphics what the funnel looked like when we got there. He felt like that would be a big one because he'd been following his e-funnel stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And we got there and I said, show me the difference in this and any other place on this. He couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't do it. 1 or 2 out of 28, I think. 1 or 2.
So 28 identified funnels on a map.
No, identified funnels in the woods. You can find 2 on a map. Only 2 of them kind of shows up if you know what you're looking for. It's not like you think. You get in the woods and it's never like you imagine it by looking at a map or a funnel.
Is that different in farm country where there's like,
sure,
properties meet up and, there's an inside corner or...
Yeah, or a strip of woods connecting 2 areas. Sure. Yeah. But in the big woods, we're talking about topographics.
Yep.
I'll tell you what I can find on the maps. I don't want to go where the topographical lines are just kind of evenly spaced and it's a flat and gradually getting tighter. And even when they're closer and wider and spread out, that's a good start. But I like it where they're swirling, where there's lines going this way, then topographical lines come back around and here. That is the place on that property I'm going to first. That's where I'm going to find my funnels.
How much of a challenge is there with thermals because when I'm picturing swirling lines or a lot of movement on the topo map, does that create more challenges with winds or?
No. When you get in there, you got to decide. I hunt the most creek crossings and the top of ditch funnels, and you're up high enough then that the wind's pretty stable. Mm-hmm. The problem is when you get where the wind is pretty calm, and then the thermals are competing with the wind. For instance, the wind blows 4 or 5 or 6, 7 miles an hour, and it's overcome the thermal. Then all of a sudden it dies down. Now the thermals took a hold. That's when you'll have the wind hitting you in the face and the deer down yonder will smell you. That's when you get the swirls. But if you got a good steady cold front with a good nice 5 to 10, 7, 8 mile an hour wind, you're not going to have the issue. Then you got to look at it when it gets early morning and evening. You got to be careful. You don't want to get in a stand an hour before daylight if the deer are topographically are below you, because the coldest time of the day is right before daylight, and your thermal's going to be going down them deer for 30 minutes in the dark, and you got to educate your buck. In that situation, you want to go in right at daylight, but in a situation where geographically the deer movement is above you, then you can go in earlier and your thermals are not going to be going toward them. There is so much things to consider, I guess, and prioritizing funnels. When I go to a new property, the tightest funnel I find, the most hard funnel that I can find on that whole property that is pulling the most deer through it. I call a place information gathering places. Sometimes there's a funnel so tight that 50% of the deer moving through it is through that whole property is going to that one spot, one tree. Trouble of it is most people just don't find them, and they don't. And a lot of people, they'll find them and they'll think maybe it's right, but they lack the confidence. And so they'll move on looking for something else because they've never been in the woods with somebody like me to show them where they can build that confidence up. Maybe they'll come back to it, maybe they won't. I like to count. I like to look at I like a good hard funnel where several trails I can count come into it. Then if I can count, say you got 3 major trails coming to it, and you back up on them 3 trails, and there's 2 feeder trails coming in to make this trail a main trail. I'm not talking about deer feeder. I'm talking about smaller trails coming into it and making a heavier trail and then heavier trail. And then the main trail, or sometimes there's 2. Sometimes the ditch funnel fades out a little bit right at the top, and you got some of them cutting the corner a little, shortcut, and some of them going around. But I like to look at how deep they are and how well worn. And then I like to count the trails coming into it too. So, but keep in mind that a trail out in the woods, a heavy trail in the woods don't mean anything. But the trail out in the woods that is heavy because deer are forced onto it because they're going around some kind of restriction means everything. The same thing that is funneling does on it all year will funnel the bucks on when they get to going hard, where they're forced to be.
Is there any?
But number one is the amount of deer that funnel is carrying, the amount of deer that is forced to be there. More and more trails come together, force more and more deer to be there. That's number one.
So you mentioned the importance of the biggest constriction on a farm or a parcel or a piece of ground being one of the most important things. The spot where 50% of the deer may go through a spot. What about the faint trails where people talk about, there's doe trails and buck trails that are more faint?
Well, I could see where that's the case when the bucks are on a pattern. For instance, if a family group of 5 does go down a trail every day, it will be heavier. And just say a mature buck goes down this trail every day, then that's 1 compared to 5. It could be 5 times heavier. There's some logic to that. There's a lot of other things you hear that ain't got no logic to it, but there's some logic to that. If that trail has mature buck sign on it, then I'd be interested in putting a camera on it, but I wouldn't want to hunt that single faint trail. Sometimes there's a faint that he don't come through once every 2 or 3 weeks, and half of that might be at night, even during the right time. So I want to hunt where I follow that on down to where it joins another one of his trails, and then maybe where it goes down what I call a short range funnel. It goes around the pond and 2 more of his travel corridors come together, and now it's all of a sudden heavy. Or where his trail is forced because of a ditch or a fence or some kind of short range funnel into the doe's trail also. And then maybe another trail on the other side of the doe trail come on. I want to cover as many corridors as I possibly can. Mm-hmm. His don't necessarily, if I'm hunting him in that stage, that number 1 way I hunt, when I'm hunting his pattern, I don't have to necessarily have a funnel to hunt him there. I'm going to hunt his sign. I'm going to monitor his scrapes. Used to, I'd monitor them. Now I use a camera. Used to, I'd go in there and evaluate his scrapes pretty often in a way that was non-threatening to him. Anymore, I got to use a camera. But that is a different situation. That is a pattern when he's patternable. It's not when after November 3rd. When they're going everywhere, running all over the woods, trying to find that first hot doe, and they don't care where they're going. They're going from one patch of woods to another, or they know where these family groups of does are. During the fall, while they was at night going around and leaving their sign in these family groups of does, they had a specific way to go where they were in cover and this and that. When that woods get to smelling sweet, and all of a sudden now they're going to go the shortest route. I don't care if it's across the interstate or a field or whatever. They're going. Yeah. They're maximizing their time.
Yeah. What do people? I guess. I mean, all funnels are not created equal. So when I was reading that book, I was thinking of potential funnels where I have stands now, and in the book, there's 18 questions to ask when it comes to a funnel. So how does someone that doesn't know this, maybe they're just now hearing of this idea for the first time, it's the summer, and they're thinking, I need to go find me a funnel and get set up. Is there any, because we were just talking before, it's like, learning a new skill or learning to talk a new language. Like once you figure it out, you're like, oh, that makes sense now, to where you're able to find the tree, you're able to find the spot. But how do you communicate to someone to figure out what that may or may not be with some level of efficiency?
You have given me so much to talk on. I can't get over the first part.
I'm going to start asking shorter questions.
How long have you been a podcast host?
A lot. I got a lot of questions. That's the problem.
Well, you shouldn't have. Have you not had on some of what you thought was the best hunters in the world?
Yeah, absolutely.
And this year you're thinking about your stand size and where you could move them to a funnel.
Yeah. I had one stand, and it's my favorite stand, and I got to thinking about it, and it is in a really, really good funnel. It's like when I was reading.
Why did you end up with it there?
So it's a top. There's a lot of bedding nearby. It's a high point, a gradual terrain feature where there's a bunch of bedding areas, and bucks travel to go from point A to point B, and there's a drainage on a northwest wind that shoots down to a drainage where I have never gotten winded out of that stand on a northwest wind. And I see, as far as buck sightings, that's the stand. If I want to go to a stand and see a bunch of deer, that's the spot.
So you figured out it was in a funnel because of the buck sightings and after you read my book. But what I'm getting at, you've been a podcast host for a long time and you don't even know the one thing that is significant for hunting the rut. See, there's so much garbage out there. It's a shame that there is. The amount of deer a funnel is covering depends on the population of deer.
Sure.
I might go to a funnel in the Midwest and the trail may be 3 times heavier than it is here. It takes evaluating the whole property before you understand that. Some funnels may cover half the deer moving through the property, but the ditch or restriction may not cover half the property. It's just because of some things that I can't even tell you all of them. I find that funnels on real high ground at the very, say there's a lower ridge here with a ditch on it, and then there's a higher ridge here that's the highest ridge on the whole property with a ditch on it. I find that very, very few deer use this funnel where more use this funnel. Mm-hmm. I think it's because instead of going to the very peak of a ridge and going around that funnel, they take a shortcut around that highest peak. Well, there's just certain things you'll never know for sure. So all funnels are not created equal, and what a funnel carrying a lot of deer here, where there's not a lot of deer, may not nearly be as heavy as a funnel carrying a lot of deer at another mm-hmm. place. Now, I wanted to back up and say that because I thought that was significant. Now, tell me your question again, only this time shortened.
How does a dummy like me go find a new funnel this summer? That's the...
It don't hurt to look at the topographical map and find where there's the most diversity in topographical lines. Mm-hmm. You ain't gonna find a funnel like it, but go to that area. Cut a deer trail. Find a deer trail, follow it. 1 or 2 things are going to happen. If you're in a mountainous terrain where there's a lot of topographics, either that trail is going to get fainter and fade out, or it's going to get heavier. If it gets heavier, you're picking up deer. Keep following it. If it gets heavier again, you're picking up deer, and you're picking up deer because they're fixing to go around something. If it starts getting fainter, turn around and go the opposite direction on it. It may fade out too. Then you go to the next trail. I like to cut deer trails and follow them. And you'll learn a whole lot by that. You can also in the snow count the number of tracks. I'll cut a deer track in the snow in a place I want to find a funnel and follow it. It's going to lead you through funnels. During any day movement of a deer, he's going to be utilizing a funnel. He's going to be going around something that's going to put him in contact with other deer that's doing the same thing as he is. Mm-hmm. So I would advise you to go to where there is a lot of topographics and then find the deer trail and walk it. And then you'll find that deer is going to converse that terrain the same way you're going to converse it to save energy. Now, if you let's say I've got a 14-year-old kid, or I used to have my boys, AJ and Ray, and play with me, and I'd go around a little easier. I'd stay on the level ground to go around a ditch where they might run down in and back right up back the other side. But these older bucks, when they get arthritis in their hips and they're going for miles and hours, they get sore, they're going to stay on the level ground as much as possible. I noticed when me and Joe Miles first went to scouting a place, he's going right down in the ditch and back out. He wasn't going around a long way around. And then after about 3 or 4 hours, guess what? He was doing the same thing I was doing. So the longer that rut goes on and the more these deer move and the sore they get, the more they're going to stay on level ground instead of going down in ditches and back. And it ain't just deer. It's coyotes, everything in the woods utilizes terrain features. Some funnels are a lot more significant than others. The first thing I look for is the one carrying the most deer on that whole property. That's going to be my first pick. The next one is the one carrying the most deer that has big sign. The funnel with a lot of big sign is probably in the mature buck's core area. Mm-hmm. That may be where you can kill him while he's still on his pattern once he pulls in the daylight. because of the pending rut. Because deer traveling from November 3rd until the end of November, going hard looking for that next hot doe or the first hot doe, not going to be pissy putting around, standing there making a lot of sign. Only if he's with a doe in heat, he will be, because he'll be bored entertaining himself until she's receptive, if he's with a doe coming in. And a lot of times the funnel ain't the chopped rabbits are steep and odd and irregular, and there's not a good opportunity for a buck just stand there and make rubs and scrapes anyway. But if you find a lot of big rubs and scrapes in a good tight funnel, then you probably got two things. You probably got opportunity to hunt a deer on his movement pattern in his core area, and also long range if it's carrying enough deer. A deer that's going from point A to point B during the rut, maybe never been through that particular place in his life, but when he hits a ditch, he goes around it. Or when he hits a good trail that's getting heavier, he'll get on that trail and go. Two reasons. Number one is he knows that's the best topographics to be on to converse the terrain. And number two is his best chances to find a hot doe. That's why I often make mineral licks in a place that's not real tight to enhance the trail systems coming into it during the winter. Of course, you're not hunting minerals in the winter, but you're hunting the trail systems that's coming through. Mm-hmm. There's ways to make funnels, too, if there's not a great funnel there. But
how do you do that? You can guess some of the obvious. Maybe you fell a couple trees. If you own the ground, maybe you put up a short fence. What are some other things that help to create a funnel?
Yeah.
Or even you talked about enhancing funnels too, or having a mock scrape at your stand locations too to have more opportunity.
I always do that, of course.
Yeah.
Let's just say you're hunting flat terrain in Alabama. There's no funnels. Start out where most of the buck sign is, or the most deer sign is, the heaviest trail, and that's usually going to be on an edge. Say you can only hunt 60 acres, and over here is where most deer are, so you can't do that. But you can find an edge where you're hunting. A thicket breaks off into open woods, or a pines breaks off into hardwood, some kind of edge. Deer are creatures of edge. Find that edge and then set it up for yourself. Don't just start making mock scrapes and putting mineral licks out anywhere. Walk back and forth on that edge and find the right tree. Back when I was young, I'd set up the perfect place you ever seen in your life, and I'd look and there wasn't even a tree worth getting in. Boy, I was from Missouri back in, I had experience, had to show me everything. I couldn't figure it out, but you might go up and down that edge and make sure. And I like two trees opposite each other. Say the edge is here and there's a tree here, I can put a stand in, and good in here, I can put a stand in. And then that's what I really want. So if the wind changes, I just hop right across. So you can put a cross fence. I don't want to sit there and look at a fence. I don't like to look at the hand of man when I'm hunting. Of course, if you saw some trees, it's the same way, kind of, but at least it's trees you're looking at instead of a fence. I want to make everything. I want to restrict deer every way I can, not to go where I don't want them, and I want to do things that enhance them coming here. So I can hinge cut, and if you're not allowed to cut and manage there, you can pull in brush, block off as far as you can in both directions where they can't get behind your tree, and where that will encourage them to come to where it's easiest. Then make this path real easy. Put a mineral lick there or some kind of attractant through the summer where they're forming a trail system through there. And not only are they forming the trail system through there, they're getting used to going that route. Say they're wanting to go to point B over here, and normally they'd go through here, but now they start going this way because they're going to mineral lick then on over there. And they'll get used to going through there, and they're more comfortable there. And buck and rut hits one of them trails that was formed because, say, a mineral lick was there, then he's allowed to follow it right in. And then make a good mock scrape there. They might come through at night, bucks might be in, finding that mock scrape, and then next time they're in the area in the daytime, they might come through there and check it. So just learn to think about stuff like that, and there's ways to do it if you don't have any terrain features to funnel deer.
You brought up a pretty interesting point, but having two setups for the particular funnel, the best spot or the highest probability location for a mature buck to go through during the rut, and having 2 stands there. I feel like that's I personally have not done that.
Well, if you got 2 stand sites, one on each side, let's say southwest wind blows across the trail, or kind of the way the deer are coming down the trail. So you got a southwest wind for a week during a good time a year to hunt him, you can't hunt. But this tree on the other side would just miss them, see. So what that does is increases the amount of time you can hunt that spot. And if there's high and low ground, then topographics, then the thermals in the evening, you'd have to be over here in this stand, in the morning over here, of course. So that will just allow you more time in that stand by doing that.
Yeah. How did you figure out this was one of the biggest sticking points for me and bucks are starting to grow velvet right now, so it's even more top of mind, but you talked about a mature buck hanging out either by himself or with other immature bucks. So not a bachelor group of, a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old. 1 5-year-old and maybe 2 1-year-olds is in the group in the summer, and that buck typically sticking pretty close to that area throughout the fall. When did you figure that out?
I got on the internet about 2 weeks ago. I read that from a guy, and it sounded logical to me. If you read North American Whitetail Magazine or my new book, I got the stories of all these big deer in there. You'll find about half of them. I've got a picture of that buck in velvet in the same area I killed him in.
Uh-huh.
The fall and spring shift was the new idea to me. I knew some of them was leaving the property.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew some of them, I got the picture all summer on the property. And I got to thinking back and looking at them pictures and remembering. And the ones that was in a bachelor group usually left the property. They'd make the true fall shift. And the ones that was bachelored by themselves on a mineral lick or with a subordinate toady, a 2.5 or 1.5-year-old buck, but not with other dominant bucks. He never did leave. So time in the woods is how I figured out. Experience.
Yeah.
They say experience is the best teacher. To me, it's the only teacher that's worth anything. You can learn from other stuff, but that don't mean that knowledge is correct. Mm-hmm. You might think it is because, like I said, hunting is not an exact sport. I might kill one doing something by total luck that I think was because of a certain reason.
Yeah.
And that fuels a lot of this stuff. A person might get online and comment, hunt that dominant strape and hunt him from, I killed mine in the middle of November. On November 15th, you need to be on that strape. And he may have killed one on November 15th on that strape, but that may be that outlier because we're dealing with personalities. Anything can happen. Anything can happen. My daddy always said in a lifetime, anything can happen. And he told me a lot of stuff I didn't believe. One time he told me that his hound dogs would eat poke salad. And I said, Daddy, I've never had one to nibble on poke salad. He said, well, he said, for the first couple of weeks they won't, but you keep putting it to them. If you can't afford nothing else, he said, they're going to nibble pretty good. So there's situations that we never know about that cause something to happen, but what we got to do is play the average, the mathematical odds, what happens most of the time. And over the short range, it might work out. It would done something else would have been better. But over that long range, if we play the mathematical odds, then we're going to end up successful over the long haul.
Talking about mock scrapes as well, you mentioned what are some mistakes? There was something that stuck out to me, but what are some mistakes people make when it comes to mock scrapes?
Well,
I can give you a hint of what. One of them was you've noticed that mock scrapes specifically, lower than 4 feet, typically a mature buck doesn't fool with. Someone hangs a mock scrape and they make it too low.
You don't hang a mock scrape, you hang the limb over it.
Uh-huh.
You're talking about the limb over the licking branch.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a difference in a buck choosing the limb. Say he's got a trail here and he's mature. and he's choosing the limb to strafe under. He's going to generally pick a big limb, something he can mash up and tie up with his horns. He's going to generally pick one coming down from above that's chest high up to head high. He may even wrap his hind legs and work it. That's what that buck chooses. That's how I help identify that he's a mature buck. Plus, the ground will be cupped. That strafe will be low because he has the power and the determination to tear it up and dig it out. Where a 1.5-year-old buck may pick any limb. Plus, he's shorter. He might take a little brushy limb here and strafe the ground and just barely get the leaves back. I'm talking about what a mature buck prefers in the identifying part of it. If you've got to stand there and you make your mock strafe, it really don't matter. If he's coming by your stand anyway, he will stop and work a nice pile out ground. Now, I still try to make mine like a mature buck prefers. He might come through at night and find it and want to come back because he really likes the way it's set up. So, yeah, I don't know. I've seen these licking branch rope deals down pretty close to the ground. I've never used or tried one. I've never found a place I couldn't make a straight by manipulating limbs and brush and doing it the natural way. But now people use them with good success. I ain't got no problem with them. I just ain't got no experience in them, and I ain't got nothing in mind to use them. I might move a grapevine. I've done that before. Mm-hmm. Cut off a section and tie it up coming down because I've seen some awful big bucks working grapevine.
What's in the big woods here and then to the Midwest, what's the size of you talked about paying attention to tracks. What's the size of a track that gets you excited here? And then what's the size of a track, and maybe you know some of these deer are from Illinois. What's the size of a track in Illinois that gets you excited? And then you're measuring them width or height?
Length generally, but now I do like the width to match the length. I like a wide track, but here in Tennessee in this area, 2 3/4 began to make me think that deer might have rode long enough to be reaching maturity, and 3 inch is a big one in statue, but I'm beginning to rethink that some.
Really?
I think the skeletal structure of a deer by the time he's 2 years old or 3 years old is pretty well set. You can get take Shaq, I think is his name, one of these big basketball players. He had a big foot when he was 10, 11, 12 years old. Clay, my son, ended up being 6'4", and he had a 14-inch foot, but he had it when he was young because the skeletal structure is big. So I think that I find a lot more big racks on big-footed deer because the deer is big. And the rack is an extension of the skeletal structure. You have to get up there in that field dress 225, 250 range and up, really, to get them bodies most of the time that has a giant rack. Occasionally, you'll see a little buck going through the woods with a giant rack. But if you got a giant buck going through the woods with a giant rack compared to his body, then you have really got something. But most of the time, the rack is comparable to the body. You don't find freaks with little bodies and huge racks. And a lot of times you'll find a big buck with a smaller rack, but it may be because of his age. But I think the bucks has got big skeletal structures, and they're big bone deer because, just like people, it's genes. And then I like to hunt the one of the big track because I think a bigger buck has a much more chance of having a big rack.
Do you still pay close attention to tracks with trail cameras now?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You can get fooled bad if you don't. You can have ground shrinkage. That buck's bought. That you can say that buck. Look at this picture I got. Boy, he's a big one. Hey, no. Well, he's bulky. You look at the size of his body. Well, in that picture, you can't tell if he's big as a rat or big as a cow, because there's nothing there to compare him to. So, just because he's bulky with a rack that's good size compared to his body, deer range so much, especially here. A mature buck may never hit over 140 dress weight. Then Mountain Mike there, he field dressed 220 something pounds. So there's a lot of variation difference in the size of their bodies. But if you've got a deer that dresses 140 and he's past 3.5 and he's bulky and got a decent neck and his rack's comparable to him, you may think that's a trophy. Well, you might go in there and look at that scrape and find his track and measure in it, maybe 3.5 inches. That very thing happened to me here on this farm. And I realized he ain't no trophy at all. He's probably a 135-inch deer, but he's mature. So yes, it's even more important with trail cameras because you don't know as big as a rat or a cow. Unless there's a cow standing there or a rat.
A rat in the picture too.
So many people will show you pictures of a big deer and say, look what a giant. Well, it might be, it might not.
Yeah. How big in the Midwest, what's the size of a track that gets you excited there?
3.25 long or 3.25 to 3.5 long gets me real excited. And you can tell a lot of times that they're heavy too, you know.
Yeah.
Biggest one I ever hunted, biggest track, that and over there was the second biggest. The biggest I ever hunted was a couple of years ago in Kansas. And never seen a track like that. It was probably 4 inches and it belonged to a 220-inch non-typical, and I think he scored more than I even thought because his track was so large that his body was a lot larger than I realized, so that makes his rack a lot bigger. But yeah, I like over 3 inches in the Midwest. You got a list of questions there, young man?
Yeah, I've been going off the top of my head here. Now I'm getting some ones I wrote down. Yeah. Are these generated from stuff you read in my book? Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, all of them.
I do have one question that I thought of.
Yeah.
So pertaining more to hill country, and like the Appalachian foothills, mountains like we're in right now, there's a lot of rock outcroppings on the edges of the hills. A lot of times, a lot of the funnels I'm finding are coming down in between openings off the tops down onto that bench. But there's, a certain spot I have in my mind where I know there's big mature deer that hang out there, but there's 4 or 5 different heavily used trails all dumping off the tops there. So how would you go about, narrowing down which run in between those rocks should be the one you sit?
Trail cameras are good, but here's the thing about it. Without that kind of information, if you're going to hunt him this year and you hadn't got the intel, which funnel he used the most last year, I always play the mathematical odds. The one he used the most last year is the one I would want to hunt. This time of year, the one he used the most this time of year, in the fall, the one he used the most at night or day, the one he frequents the most, ones I want to use because when that calendar pulls him in the daylight, that's when he's going to come through. That's one I want to use to hunt. But keep in mind that if it's pretty well equal, or let's say you're getting him in all of them occasionally, you can't hunt the middle ones. Let's say you've got 4 gaps. We call them gaps in bluffs.
Yeah.
Say you got 4 gaps. There's no way you can hunt the middle 2. Unless the wind's going straight down or straight up. But if you've got any kind of quartering wind toward any of the others, you've got to be on this one with the wind going this way and on this one with the wind going this way. Mm-hmm. But unless you got a very still day and you can get below, somehow the trail turns where you can get below it. But generally the trails are running up and down in that situation. So to hunt the middle ones, you'd have scent going toward one or the other. But so you hunt this end on the wind going in any direction this way, and this one in the wind going this way. You put cameras in all 4, and only one of them has his picture, and it's one of the middle ones. Only one of them has his picture, and you got quite a few deer on both sides. You might educate him by spooking them, but it's worth a try.
Yeah.
But intel through cameras, human logic won't do it. You can't say, well, I think you use this and because there's a little more cover here and here. No, you've always got to let the information drive what you do.
All right. And then kind of piggybacking off of that, you got your camera set up, you figured out exactly which one he's using to go up and down. Say, for example, this is a north-facing slope. You setting up down below the gaps on the bench or up on top of the gaps on the flat?
Every situation is different.
Okay.
I would have to walk in there and look.
Okay.
Let's say I walked in there and I went down. Say they wanted to accept a tree right in the gap. So I started down, and the trail forked and spread across apart real quick, and there's no acceptable tree. I'd turn around and go back up. And let's say the trail stayed together then and went by an acceptable tree on both sides. Then I'd hunt above. Let's say the trail stayed together going down and up, but going down, I intercepted another major trail coming down the bench, and there's a tree that I can get to be where I can have both of them on the upwind side of me. Mm-hmm. Then that's the one I would hunt. So every situation would have to be dissected, meticulously dissected.
Yeah, I've been trying to figure that bench and bull out for as long as I could walk up.
For a slight price, my friend. You've got to use some common sense. Okay, I'm losing half the deer here, and they ain't a trail acceptable. And I can't now. I'd have to hunt a tree over here one day and hunt him over here the next day. Yeah. Down here, they're staying together and coming down to another trail, and they're all joining. And I've got a great tree here I can hunt with a northwest wind blowing away from them. Mm-hmm. See, you've got to dissect it.
Okay. No, those are
very good question.
Yeah. We can switch.
If you need a minute, Jake, I got another good one for him. This spot, I want to hear, your thoughts on it. I've pretty much, I would like to think I have it figured out, but it's hill country, but it's the exact opposite of what everyone thinks in hill country. It is down in the creek bottom. So this spot is where you got swampy bottom meeting hardwoods bottom with a power line running perpendicular. So you got a culmination of a couple different things all coming together. There's 5 or 6 different trails all meeting here. And I got a couple good trees that I could sit in depending on the wind. And in any given year, there's one main hub scrape with I think last year I counted 5 all within about a 30 yards of each other. I can't tell you how many times I've, played the wind, sat in the tree, like, oh yeah, I'm going to get them coming this way. Wind's going to be just off wind. I should have the perfect shot. And they come in from a completely different way that I did not expect coming into that scrape there. And don't give me a shot because the beech leaves are, like a wall running across one of the trails there. Should I get closer to that scrape where all those trails are intersecting, or start, keep backing off and keep just playing those odds, those chances of this is a safe wind. I know this trail goes right into that scrape and I can still shoot trail number 2 of 4 coming into this scrape.
I like to cover it all. Okay. Because you ain't killed them, have you?
I've killed 2 deer in there.
Okay, but you ain't killed the one that you was...
No.
Because I like to play them all, because even in a good tight place where 3 or 4 of his different travel corridors intersect, the chance of him being there in daylight the particular time or 2 you get to hunt it is slim. Mm-hmm. So don't leave those other avenues where you can't shoot to them.
Okay.
Get in there this time of year and get rid of them limbs that were in your way. Mm-hmm. Move on in tighter. And get in there and you still got a safe direction to blow your wind, right?
Yes.
Yeah, no, get on in there and cover. Never set up where you can cover 2 corridors if you can set up in a different tree and cover 3. Okay. Never cover 3 where you can set up in a different tree and cover 4. So many people have tried the blue by not following that principle. That is the essence of funnel hunting. It's actually the essence of trophy hunting. Mm-hmm. So no. People say, well, big bucks don't use trails. I beg to differ, when they're on their pattern, their predictable pattern, the time frame I discussed, they'll, from breaking up from their bachelor groups, hard horns, to November 3rd, they're on a pattern. They do use trails. If that buck comes through and I go looking where he walked through and there's no trail at all, well, I know that's nothing I can capitalize on. He's not on a pattern. He might do that once a year.
Yeah.
So yes, if they're on a predictable pattern, that means they do the same thing more than once, over and over. Mm-hmm. So get in there where you can cover all those corridors. Every trail you can cover, find a tree that you can cover all of them, and do plenty of trimming right now. Don't worry about it. Get in there and trim. Mm-hmm. I had a guy tell me after deer started putting on horns coming out of their head that he don't get in the woods. I thought, well, this is a pretty good time to be scouting. I said, what logic is that? And he said, well, I don't want to disturb them. I said, to begin with, you're 9-10 months away from hunting them. You think they're going to think back and think, oh, I smelled humans there 9 months ago. I ain't going in there. And the second place is, if they make that fall shift, they're not even going to be in that area. They're going to be somewhere. You're going to be hunting them somewhere. You're going to be hunting a different deer than the ones that's there now. Mm-hmm. There are so many, it's hard to understand. So many people preach this don't disturb an area, don't disturb an area. Well, that's again where we're looking at a different situation. Yeah. If I'm manipulating my property and I got a switch grass field over here and I'm trying to hunt a deer coming out into soybeans right here, and I've set it all up and the deer ain't doing what they naturally do, I've set up for them. And I don't want to walk through the switchgrass field or where my scent's going into the switchgrass field to get in my stand. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a different situation. In the big woods, you generally don't even know where them deer are bedding or where they're feeding. And if you're hunting the rut and hunting a funnel, or those deer, the one that you kill may be 5 miles an hour when you go to that stand, and he may have never been through there again. Oh, that may be the first time that year. Mm-hmm. You got a good situation. You might want to, if you need to push a few more trails to where you've got a really good, nice, close shot, you want to always try to have that deer 15 to 18 yards. You don't want to miss or wound him. If you can push some more stuff around, even where you can even cover more from that tree, then definitely do. Yeah. But you got a good situation there going on. You just don't be afraid to get in there on them. No, you piss your foot around, he'll die of old age or somebody else will kill him before you get a chance. Mm-hmm. Get in there where if he comes through, you can get him. Mm-hmm. Because you don't get them opportunities that many times on big woods deer.
I'm listening. I'm enjoying that. I'm taking notes here. You mentioned 15, 18 yards. Do you think people inherently set up for too long of shots resulting in poor outcomes?
Absolutely. I can't remember when I missed a deer. Can't remember. Hey, you can put all, and it affects buck fever too. People get so tore up, they got a giant in front of them, and they're now, it's going to get away. And you don't worry about it getting away when you can put all 5 sight pins on his heart and pull the trigger. You ain't going to get buck fever. Buck fever is caused by fear of missing. So many big bucks are wounded and missed because people don't get into the heart of it. I know where the deer, I'm not betting on luck. I know where he'll be standing when I shoot him. So I set up accordingly, 15 to 18 yards away. If I need to manipulate the movement around a little with hinge cutting or something, I will. But it's way too many deer miss because people set up too far. Yeah.
What are some other things when you're in the stand? I know you talked about squirrels. Why should hunters pay attention to squirrels when they're hunting?
Well, a lot of times they'll alert you to deer, and people a lot of times don't understand why. Normally they don't alert to pussyfoot little does easing through the woods. But you take a big mature buck that's tearing the woods up and pawing and scraping the ground, using his horns, making all kinds of racket, that's disturbing to a deer. He's disturbed their world and they're going to chatter. So I like to do that. And a lot of, you said mistakes, a lot of times hunters set up wrong compared to where they're going to shoot. Mm-hmm. The right-handed hunter, I want to shoot right here to that heavy trail where they're all coming together in my funnel. Well, that's wrong. You know, if you've got, them deer can be sneaky. And if you got to do this every 3 seconds to make sure one don't sneak in on you, you're going to get caught because you're not going to do it, especially 10, 11, 12 o'clock. You've had a long day. You need to turn to where your elbow just barely misses that tree. Now you can sit and just turn your head all day and watch both directions. So many people lost giant trophies, me included, back when I was learning, because I wasn't set up where I could watch. Nothing makes me more nervous than to set up where I can't see. I'm telling you, if the woods is quiet because of pines or it's rained or something, and you got people just think, well, I ain't seen one in 3 hours, I ain't gonna see a deer all day. Man, that's the wrong mindset. You can miss the best buck of your life by doing that. You know how I know? Yeah, you gotta, there's so many things to consider. We could talk for a week, I guess. But the way you orientate your stand compared to them trails coming together and the funnels is very important.
So just for people who are listening to this and might not watch the video version, you anticipate X marks the spot on the funnel is
the sweet spot.
Dead north. Dead north is the...
where I want to shoot.
Yeah, so on a degrees, you'd be...
I don't know much more about degrees than I do multiplication tables. Or your ABCs in a line, but I know this. I know I just barely want to be able to miss the tree with my elbow and still shoot, so I can watch in both directions that the deer are having movement. That way, if I get that lackadated thing where I'm just there all day and not seeing nothing, I won't just get locked in, you know. I can easily turn my head. I don't have to get up and do that.
What about using milkweed? Do you use milkweed or do you use something else for keeping track of the wind?
Milkweed or that powder has its place to see how the thermals work and how the air currents drift. But that's not my number one thing at all. I want a thread tied into my stabilizer. I use dental floss and I'll work it with a knife till I get real thin where it just float around, because you're not going to sit there and drop that milkweed or squirt that bottles of powder out when it's going to cost you a fortune. You got 20 empty bottles at the bottom of your tree you got to pick up all day long. But I can sit there and watch that, and I know what the wind's doing all the time. And I've got mine so thin, even a slight current will turn it. And that way, if I've got the wind, now it's started to swirl here. And then it stabilizes back. And then it starts swirling again. I'm starting to think about leaving because I don't want to educate my buck. There ain't much to get me out of a tree if I'm hunting a trophy and the temperature's right for all day movement, but a swirling wind will, because I know I'm not going to get by with it. And plus, let's say you're getting ready to shoot a deer and you're watching your stabilizer here and the winds are going here and you was going to wait to here to shoot him, but now you say, no, it's changed a little. I've got to shoot him before I get right here the way that threads are going, so you got to shoot him right here. So I'd feel like I was hunting blind if I didn't have a thread on my stabilizer to watch constantly.
How'd you figure that out, or what made you do that?
What do you think?
You read it? You listened to a podcast, probably this one actually. You listened to last week's episode.
No, I learned everything the hard way.
Uh-huh.
Everything I've learned the hard way, I reckon. You know. And plus, when you're sitting there in a tree stand 12 hours a day, week after week, you got to find something entertaining. So maybe you could use that to think a little bit. Hey, what if this happens, or what if this happens, or what if this happens?
What about drawing on a deer? I feel like the moment of, someone, they identify the funnel or they get into a spot where, okay, they see the buck they're after, they're coming. What are some key things for people to know to make sure they don't screw that up? Well,
I don't have a whole lot of problem because I'm above their peripheral vision. Generally, I'm close enough to that trail. If I'm 20 feet up and 15 yards in the trail, I'm generally drawing him if he's just standing there looking like this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you might want to wait his head down or behind I've usually got a straight there to begin with to drop his head in. Then I draw. Then I wait till he raises his head to shoot, because with his head down, he'd drop a lot faster. But generally, a big buck would just hunch a little anyway and run off. But you got to get up above there. If you're out there, if you're 20 feet up and you're 15 yards in the stand, you're probably above his peripheral vision. But if you're out there 25 yards from where he's standing, then you're probably not above his peripheral vision. It's a lot more cautious. You got to be a lot more careful. So that's another point of being close to the trail. 15 yards gives you that peripheral vision advantage. It gives you another advantage. If it's a 6, 7, 8 mile an hour wind, generally at 15 yards, I can hunt with the wind blowing over the funneled deer because it's generally it's about 30 or 35 yards out there before it's made, where your scent's going down. So there's a lot of advantage of being close. One of them is drawn. I'll tell you, there ain't much I can tell you other than experience. Then you ask, how do I gain that experience? Well, you can do it by drawing at the deer you want to kill, but I can gain more in one season drawing at non-target deer than I can a lifetime just the ones I want to kill, just because of the mathematics of it. So back when I was young, I drew back on a lot of deer. Sometimes I thought I was in good shape where I could not get by, and you learn. Now, I will say, keep that finger behind that trigger, and I will also say, I'm not going to tell you how I learned that one. I want to also say, don't come down on him where it would kill him unless you've got some kind of good mechanism where you know it's not going to fire by accident. And even that, you're risking it. But make sure you don't do it on a non-legal deer, because you might end up having to tag him. But yeah, I've drove back on a lot of non-target deer, and I learned pretty quick by doing that what I could get by with and what I can't. So that's my advice. I can't sit here and tell you all the scenarios you're going to encounter. There's just too many of them, but experience is the best teacher. Or the worst. Experience is a tough teacher because it gives the test first, and after that it gives the lesson.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know.
Have you
tried?
Go ahead, sorry.
That's all right. Go ahead.
With these deer here, I noticed you didn't mention you rattled in any of the deer. What's your position of rattling vocalization for mature bucks?
I'm generally set up in such a tight funnel that any deer within hearing of me is going to be under me anyway.
Yeah.
So I don't want to put them on alert coming in. Rattling is good for somebody that don't know how to set up. You know, you just get out in the open woods and you set up and hope a deer is going to be in hearing of you. But when you learn how to work that terrain and you know what you're doing as far as a deer being on a pattern, why rattle and get him alert running in looking for something when he was probably going to be there anyway? I'll tell you how I learned that. It was a giant, massive 8-point with a lot of stickers and probably a 7 or 8 pound rack. That's how I learned that one.
Was that one in a patch of timber, a little patch of timber?
That was a different one.
Okay.
There's something on there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would gladly trade all these big deer for the ones I've had within 20 yards and not got because of mistakes I made.
Yeah.
I'm from Missouri. They had to show me. And they're more than willing to do that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah, I rattled in a big one one time, and he was coming right to me because he was there within 30 seconds. So he was on that funnel I was hunting, going to be right there, but he's doing this. I hung my horns up, seen him coming, hung my horns up and got my bow, and them horns just kept wanting to rattle and rattle. He didn't like that up there in that tree, so. But anyway.
I'm thinking here in terms of the woodsmanship, I want to talk about the rut here. Is there any other woodsman questions that I didn't ask that you think a lot of people misunderstand?
10,000 of them.
I figured.
10,000 of them.
How do you know which saddle is the right saddle to sit on in the rut?
You mean one of them things you set on up there in a tree? That looks like a slingshot?
No,
Oh.
not those.
Oh,
I'm talking
I don't
terrain-
know. I never have hunted, but
terrain features.
never have hunted but maybe one saddle in my life.
Really?
I just, I hear a lot about them, but just never have found that that they move a lot of deer through them. You go to a saddle, Okay, there's a low place in the ridge. That's where I want to go hunt. That's the lowest place, and that's where they're going to cross. Hardly ever is that the case. And if you get up there and look, you'll know. Let the evidence guide you. I don't care why they're going through there, if it's a saddle or not a saddle. Always, the reason ain't important. The location of what is taking place is what is important. But I've never seen a real heavy trail going up over a saddle. Just never seen it. And if they don't do it often enough to make a trail, I'm not interested in hunting there. I hunt with the head of ditch funnels, the creek crossings, and places that is moving enough deer through them that they're significant trails. No, I believe you could set. Listen here, these big woods, big mature deer like this, and especially the big ones, exceptional for that area in the big woods, are very rare. You can't spend your time sitting in a place that ain't significant, that ain't carrying enough deer to have at least a decent trail. You got to, your decisions have to be, your calculations has to be correct, or you're not going to hunt in the type of situation I've hunted all my life. You're not going to have an impressive trophy room if they're not. You can't pay no attention to some of this nonsense that you hear on the internet. Man, there's a lot of it out there. You just can't do it.
One question the story about people hunting, and your question always, how many deer did you see? Well, I saw 20 or 30. How many could you have shot? Maybe 3 or 4. Do you think that's an important question for people to ask themselves to understand if they might think they're in the funnel, but if they could only shoot 3 out of the 20?
Absolutely. I like to be able to, normally I can kill 3/4 or to all of the deer I see in a day, I can kill them. And if you can only kill, you say 10 or 15 deer and you could only kill 3 of them, you need to go scout some more. You've not found that spot yet.
Mm-hmm.
That's no good. You can spend your lifetime sitting there and maybe kill 1 or 2 good ones. You've not got the right funnel or the right spot. The next question you should ask yourself, out of the 15 I've seen, is there somewhere I could have been and shot the majority of them? That needs to be the next question you ask yourself.
Like I said, I could ask you questions all day. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else here that would be really useful for folks for this summertime frame and leading into the fall that we haven't covered. They got to buy your book is what they got to do. That's the starting point. Honestly.
Well, I mean, what we've talked about today, that book has got months of that in there.
Yeah.
Months of reading the same thing we have talked about today, that's for sure. That's why they're valuable. People ain't going to just buy something because it's rare, because there's just so many of them. It's got to be something worth something too. The things you see that's really valuable from times of old was not junk then. It was something that's good. And these books are going to be sold out, but I'm going to come out I'm going to try to come out with another one.
This year or next year?
It'd probably be this year, because these will be sold out for long. I know we've got under 2,000 left, maybe under 1,500 by now, but I think if I didn't think the information was valuable, and if people didn't think that it was valuable, it won't be selling out. People are getting harder to fool. A lot of this nonsense on the internet now, they'll call them out on it. That's okay for people to call people out on something that's not correct in a respectful way. But to call people out like me that know something and say that's garbage just because they think it diminishes their standing, it's just jealousy. There's a difference. But people are learning more and more. I'm seeing more and more stuff, and people sending me more and more stuff about people talking about funnels now. Some of them give me the credit, most of them don't, and that's fine. You know, I don't care. I have no, it does not matter to me. I know where I stand. I know what I know. And I could care less what people think of me, but you know, so many people just really appreciate when they kill a giant buck and they begin to understand what you're saying and they use it and they kill. a giant buck, there's so many people that would just, they ain't ashamed a bit to say, hey, you taught me this, thank you.
Yeah.
And that makes it all worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you can just help one person, not help them kill, help them enjoy an activity more. Help them push hard against something, and then because they pushed hard enough against it, they succeeded. That person ain't going to be depressed and on pills. That person is going to enjoy his life. It's not that, I mean, I could be teaching golf or archery. I do, but it ain't that I've helped you kill something. It's that I have helped you do something difficult. And now because it was difficult and you accomplished it, you have a treasure, something that you take pride in, something that you can remember with a good feeling about it because you worked hard to earn it. And whether you succeed or not, you know, you won't always succeed, but if you worked very hard, you might fail to kill a big deer just because you moved at the wrong time or our current shifted. The killing ain't really the it. I figured him out and outsmarted him when I had him 15 yards. That is the victory, you know. It ain't always that the end result is good. It's just there's so many big deer that got away from me back when buck fever affected me. Giants. I mean, I'd trade them for these. And that was back when every time I'd kill one of these, somebody'd say it's a once-in-a-lifetime trophy. And it was. Only people back then only killed one of them because it was so scarce, and we was learning how to do it anyway, and our equipment went up to par. We didn't have trail cameras. You got to be careful when you celebrate success on the internet. You know, put people on a pedestal because they've got 4 or 5 big deer. You don't know what they're doing. Guy got caught this year cheating, you know, on a big old Ohio deer, and he'd been doing that for years, they said. I can talk to him in 5 minutes and tell if he knows what he's talking about or not.
What's the verdict? I'm scared to ask. No, I'm scared.
Can't you? If not, then after talking to me, you ought to be able to. Not that I'm bragging, it's just that it took me a lot longer to do it than it should have, but I've spent my life learning to do this. I hear so many people on these podcasts that don't have a clue, but people will still say, well, that don't make no sense there, and that don't make no sense. But this over here sounds pretty good. I think I'll try that part of it. Well, I don't know about that. You know, if something he says sounds illogical, then maybe the rest of it's just, maybe it's not from experience.
Sure. My last question for this portion here.
This portion.
Yeah, we'll be quick on the second one.
Okay.
We're gonna talk about the rut. I killed a turkey that killed a deer. How could that be?
Oh, my riddle.
Yeah. Give the listeners a riddle, and then we'll put in the comments or the description of what the answer is. Let's see if they can get it right.
Let's see, the riddle's in my book and the answer, but it goes something like, I have a question for you if you care to hear. I killed a turkey and a turkey killed a deer. How could this be? Answer me now and set your mind free.
That's it. Thank you so much, Bobby.
You're very welcome.